Tower Dungeon. So many of you have asked me to read this manga. It has been the most requested, the most frequent comment that I have seen for months now. I knew nothing about this story. I didn't know who the author was. So I was pleasantly surprised when I opened up the first chapter, started reading it, and initially got hit with the utmost craziest nostalgia you could imagine. Tower Dungeon is the brand new work by Nihei Tsutomu. If that name does not sound familiar, maybe some of his most reputable works do. Blame, Abara, Knights of Sidonia, and a plethora of others. This man is arguably one of the greatest dark sci-fi, dark fantasy authors in the industry, and there's a ton of different reasons. The way that he is able to capture his worlds artistically is some of the most impressive I have seen. The weight of his panel work, the intricacies of his designs, the liveliness that he brings to the page, it feels intoxicating to be absorbed into his work. He has a very interesting style of storytelling, something that isn't naturally comfortable. A lot of his work is up to interpretation, very low on the dialogue spectrum. However, through recent years and his more recent series, that paradigm has shifted a lot. There is more dialogue, more characterization, more conversations to be had now. While it loses a lot of the charm and the originality that Nihei used to provide, it does open a new doorway for him, a new platform to elevate his stories in different aspects that maybe is refreshing for him. Tower Dungeon is a beautiful blend of both, something that still captures the essence of his worlds, his artistic flair, the weight and power behind his artistic choices, mixed with a very quirky, eccentric, beautiful writing style. I was pleasantly surprised going into Tower Dungeon because it felt so familiar, and I really couldn't put my finger on where I've read a story like this before, and then it hit me like a truck. Tatsuki Fujimoto, the author of Fire Punch and Chainsaw Man, is heavily inspired and influenced by Nihei's work. The design of Pochita, for example, is influenced by Abara. They look incredibly similar, but what actually hit me were the characters, how they act, how they talk to each other, how quippy and quirky and unorthodox they tend to be. Fujimoto was brilliant at doing this, and Nihei is now stepping into that exact same realm. So Tower Dungeon in a lot of ways shares big similarities with Chainsaw Man, with Fujimoto, while as an author being its predecessor. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it feels very comforting to come full circle with Nihei and Tatsuki Fujimoto, and I think if you enjoy Fujimoto's works, you'll have a fun time with Tower Dungeon. While it's not obviously identical, there's a lot of love and passion shared between these two authors that feel familiar, and I like that a lot. Not only do I want to talk about my experience with Tower Dungeon, I want to talk about what the story's about without giving too much away, which shouldn't be all too difficult. Tower Dungeon is a dark fantasy manga, and it's very isolated. It's small in scale and design. We are not adventuring to massive multiple kingdoms or cities or continents. We're in one place with one kingdom and one ominous tower. Now this tower is very, very big, a lot of floors, and a lot of weirdness is kept within it. Creatures and abominations and dragons and all of these weird, deathly, hollow individuals. Nothing ever leaves this tower, but it offers up an opportunity for soldiers, for adventurers, for bandits, whoever to come in and explore this tower to find whatever goods could be kept within it. For the story, unfortunately, someone that is very prominent and very powerful related to the king is kidnapped, and they are kept at the top of that tower. So the full power of this nation, even a reward is offered that whoever makes it up the top and retrieves this VIP will potentially become the next king. They will have everything that they would ever want. So it sets forth this massive enclave of people of all different shapes and sizes, from all different locations, from all different walks of life, to try and save this person. A lot of people die. A lot of people do not make it far. And our story follows a young farmland boy known as Yuva. But you see, Yuva is a little bit different. This is a world of fantasy and magic and dragon hybrid people that are very powerful, but they're rare. They're exclusive. Yuva has no experience being a fighter. He has no experience exploring. He is just humble, simple country person. But to protect and serve his family and to help out his town, he takes up this task. Yuva joins a couple of other people, and this would be his little band. He's not treated all too well, just someone to carry the equipment, but you'll quickly come to notice that he is different. His physicality is through the roof. He is incredibly strong, being able to lift up boulders or jump really high or punch people through walls by accident, but he doesn't realize this. You see, Yuva is really dense. So even if he gets into combat, even if he gets into action, he does not know how to wield a sword. But if his emotions start to slowly take over him, he gets caught within the moment, and the person he's fighting is getting thrown through 4 brick walls and outside the tower. Safe to say that Yuva is different. Yuva is strong, and there's a really good reveal and explanation for it. This tower is kind of like its own ecosystem. Each floor represents kind of its own little deathly trap. Sometimes it can be simple, sometimes it can be barren, other times it's filled to the brim with booby traps, creatures, abominations. Sometimes it's got a big dragon in there or an abomination creature that turns people into stone. You don't know what you are going to get. You don't know who you're going to fight. You don't know what creatures are technically good or bad. Even trying to navigate the tower is not a simple task. It reminds me heavily of Dark Souls, not only aesthetically and symbolically, but thematically. Creatures, the designs, the architecture, the navigation, the difficulty of this tower itself in all aspects feels very Dark Souls. And I don't mean to confuse Dark Souls with general dark fantasy, because they are obviously of the same nature. Dark Souls is just dark gothic fantasy, but there's a style to Dark Souls that separates it in terms of its layout, its world design, the difficulty of navigation itself. This feels present in this tower. It's meant to be complicated. It's meant to trick people. It's meant to lure them into the depths and despair away from the easier access all the way to the top. The higher you get, the more difficult it becomes. The bigger the creatures are, the less prepared you are, and the less friendly other companions could be. The biggest disappointment about Tower Dungeon is its length. It's very short, and I was very disappointed when I got to the end. Just as I was getting into the meat of the narrative and really hooking myself into this world and just feeling everything so nicely, it ends. It stops. I'm caught up. And that is one of the biggest painstaking waits that you can have. Of course, better to wait than to rush something out, or at the risk of the author's health, of course. But the amount of monthly stories I read are far and few between, and only the best of the best for me when it comes to monthly manga stick around. Tower Dungeon, I believe, is a story that I will keep up with because I am hooked. I am excited to see this story for its narrative, for its characters, for its reveal and surprises, and while it doesn't seem grand in its approach, the amount of detail going into it already feels long running. This story could be finished in under 3 years, but it could be something that lasts longer. And for monthly stories, length isn't in their favor. 100 chapters could be the equivalent of 10 years, when for something that is commonly weekly is only 2. This is all to say that I like what Tower Dungeon is doing, and I want to see it grow, and I want to see more people engage with it. This is by an incredibly talented author, one that has made a name for themselves over the past 30 years, continued to improve and refine and experiment. Because of Tower Dungeon and continuing to ignite my appreciation for fantasy and dark fantasy and Dark Souls, Elden Ring, Night Rain, etc., this resurgence of love towards fantasy and all of its different aspects is because of Tower Dungeon. Because his art is so identifiable, just viewing it you can tell that, yep, that's Nihei. There really is a level of enjoyment you get just from viewing it. like, yeah, typical manga experience, but Nihei's works take that to the next level. You look at Blame, you look at Abara, you look at Sidonia, Paroxysm, whatever, they have such a style that feels like a breath of fresh air. Seeing how he visualizes a tower dungeon and these rooms and these creatures and these abominations isn't necessarily anything new, but he does an impeccable job of showing it his way. The scale, the perspective, everything is huge, filled with volume. No space is left empty unless on purpose. Every inch and every line is purposefully and meticulously crafted to a much bigger picture.